Thanks again for your interest to learn what's going on about research with human subjects, right? It's called the IRB regulation. Um, my name is Jason Wang. I'm the Director of Research Integrity and Compliance in the Office of Research and Sponsored Program under the leadership of Associate Vice President Dr. Simon King. So you came to this building, it's called the ORSP, Office of Research and Sponsored Program. Our mission is try to get as much as money to support as many as projects, exciting ongoing projects, right, for you. That means the three customers we are providing support: the faculty, staff, and students, meaning undergraduate students, graduate students, and some PhD and doctoral level students. And on the other side, our mission is try to provide, to generate an environment that will facilitate the ongoing research project and to reduce regulatory burden. In the meantime, to assure that everything's done is in compliance with all these applicable federal, state, local, professional, even institutional regulation requirements. So narrow down all this to the research with human subject, the IRB. Who knows what is called IRB? Raise your hand. Almost everyone, right? Yeah. Institutional Review Board. Yeah. So you will get a reward of bottle. Yeah. So again, like any compliance regulatory committee, it takes a team, meaning with all the stakeholders, from the top level, our president, Colony, to the provost, Jersky, to my boss, Dr. Simon King, to this IRB committee, and luckily we have our chair, Dr. Jim Amkar, sitting in the audience, and also all of the stakeholders, the researchers, especially our staff. Not the key is research, human subject. That's what we really care about. So the IRB has undergoing kind of revolution within the almost 2 or 3 decades. Almost start from like 1950s, 60s. But the federal level, it is called, there's as many as 17 different federal departments, agents, they start enforcing this IRB regulation. This rule is called the common rule, adopted by the many institutions. And as of January 2017, they went through a revolution. So they start a new revised common rule. And this, we took almost 1 year, at least half year, work as many as other 23 campuses at the CSU campuses. We, come up together, we did this workshop, and then we try to migrate from the pre-2018 common rule to this revised common rule. And then because of this federal regulation changes, even at this little bit complicated, the President Trump administration. So in order to really fully enforce this 2018 final common rule, they suggest give us a little bit break, because as many as 2,000 or 3,000 institutions, they have to do a lot of things, try to adapt to the new regulation. But in this case, our campus moved fast. So if you go to our website, you will find all things, almost everything got changed. And for those seasoned, experienced IRB, researchers, you got shocked. Wow, everything changed. But also, it's a good opportunity for the newbies. Wow, it's a great opportunity to start fresh. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Tiffany Rose, who have been spent a lot of time. Also here, Dr. Mary Walker. So that's our staff member. So if you have any question, please feel free to ask. If there's any generic question, we're going to respond during this presentation, and we're going to reserve a little bit Q&A session after the workshop. Please always feel free to contact us. We would rather to be bothered. That's what we paid for. Okay? Thank you so much. Enjoy your workshop.
Again, this is Jason Wayne. Mary Walker just walked out, and I am Tiffany Rose, and we're the compliance team. If you have any questions after the presentation, feel free to come up to any one of us and ask any questions you may have. So today's overview, we're going to go a little bit over our unique breakdown at the IRB here at Long Beach, go into a little bit of regulation changes, the submission and review process, and then we'll leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. So what is the role of the IRB? So on this campus, we have, our board is comprised of 13 members from various disciplines on campus, and their role is to, when they're reviewing your projects, is to assess that the subject selection is equitable, meaning that you're not using too many subjects that is necessary, or that you are not performing procedures on groups that are vulnerable groups, or making sure that you are falling within the realms of the compliance. They're looking at the risk-benefit ratio of your project and making sure that everything is good to go and that all of the components of your project fall within federal, state, local, and institutional regulations. So also, the role of the IRB is essentially an ethics committee. So one of the ways we do that, the reasons we review your projects, is to ensure that they are abiding by the regulation. I don't know if you all heard earlier this semester, or the last semester, yes, a student was approaching young women on campus for a survey asking about sexual harassment questions, and the questions became increasingly more invasive, and he started to grope individuals. That type of project obviously was not IRB approved, because the IRB would not approve a project where the projects become increasingly invasive in that manner. And that is part of why we have all projects that are considered research submitted to the IRB to ensure to review your questions, make sure that you're asking appropriate questions, and that your methodology is ethical. So now we're going to get a little bit into the compliance. So compliance, we like to say here, is a two-way street. We have the IRB has to remain compliant, and also you as investigators must remain compliant. So some of the things the IRB must do to remain compliant: we must adhere to the federal, local, and state regulations. We must maintain accurate research records. So the reason we ask for all submissions in Word document, PDF form, all aspects, even if you may have an online survey link, is that we have to hold your records for 3 years. So even if you leave the university and you don't have access to your project anymore, if it's within 3 years, we should still have your records. Also, if we ever get audited by any of the governing agencies, we should be able to produce records and tell any auditor what you are doing in your research in the field. Additionally, we also handle reports of noncompliance. So if anyone files a complaint about your research procedures, they felt uncomfortable, they got injured during your research, or if one of your subjects did something that was not allowed on your projects, the IRB compliance office, specifically Dr. Jason Wayne, handles those complaints. As an investigator, your responsibilities are to conduct your research according to the IRB application. I know you may want to make a small little change. Oh, the IRB doesn't need to know about that. Yes, we do. Additionally, you must maintain your city training. Your city training is good for 3 years, and we'll get into that a little bit later. You must avoid conflicts of interest and coercion, and you must comply with university research policies. So now we'll get a little bit into the federal regulation. Jason touched on the common rule versus the final rule a little bit, but we'll delve a little bit more into it. So the new federal regulations revise the definition of research with human subjects to now include information. It spans beyond data, but it now includes information, information or biospecimens collected and used from living individuals to draw conclusions that contribute to a general knowledge base. So essentially what that says is, if you're collecting information, whether it's from a data set or you're collecting online data, face-to-face data, any data from live human subjects, and you are using it to draw larger conclusions that will benefit a larger population, you are doing research. So We'll get more into the IRB submission process and what is required of you as investigators. So one of the first things that you should do is complete your city online training. So there's the link at the very bottom, cityprogram.org. The training is about 2 hours, and it covers the background of why IRBs were established in the first place, some of the things that the IRBs look for when reviewing projects, and also just general compliance measures. This training is good for 3 years. CSULB pays for this training. What I like to recommend, since the university is paying for the training, there are also other valuable training sessions on there that you can take in a lot of, if you're doing internships or working at other facilities or institutions, your training is transferable. You can add, if you've already completed this training at another institution, you can add us to your list of affiliates on City, or vice versa. If you leave our institution and go somewhere else, such as a hospital or something else, 9 times out of 10, most major research institutions conduct this training. So it's 2 hours of your time. You can start and stop as you go, but the IRB will confirm your training before we will approve your project. So again, when you log into City, we're going to ask for your City member ID number. It's that top number up here next to your name. When on all IRB applications, that's how we will use that number to look you up and confirm your training. And again, it's hard to see here, but that's where you'll add your course. And if you need to affiliate, this is where you'll click at the bottom to affiliate with Cal State Long Beach for your training. So the next thing, you've done your city training, you know you need to submit to the IRB. Some things you should consider is your project feasibility. Think about the time frame that your project is going in. So what's the goal of your project? What types of assessments do you need to generate? The IRB needs to see every assessment anything that subjects will see, the IRB needs to see. So think about your timeline in developing all of that material. Do you need to seek permissions from anyone? If you need to access data from another professor, the Institutional Research Assessment Office on campus, all of those places. If you're using an agency to conduct using their resources, the IRB needs to see a permission letter, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but all of those need to be obtained prior to IRB submission. So now we'll get more into the submission process and the nitty-gritty of why it takes so long. So with some of the changes, if you all are seasoned investigators, just note that we have some new changes to our forms, and a lot of your projects probably were undergone expedited review prior to. Now a lot of those projects qualify for a lower category of review called either administrative review or limited review. And we'll get a little bit more into that, but when you go onto the IRB website, we now have 3 IRB applications. We have an IRB application for existing and secondary data. That's if you're not interacting with subjects at all, but you are accessing identifiable information contained in data sets. We also have the IRB application for administrative and limited review, and that's for less than minimal risk surveys, interviews, focus groups type of question with competent adults. Anything else should be, if you are doing any type of exercise activity, if you're doing research with children, if you are drawing blood, saliva, any other invasive procedures, require submission on our 3rd application, which is the IRB application for expedited and standard review. We also have the limited review category. So what distinguishes that? The limited review category is a lower category, meaning that the IRB reviewers are focused on your data collection and your data storage. That's not to say they're not focused on everything else in your project, but they're not going to nitpick on everything else because it's a more concentrated review and it only requires 1 board member to review your project, whereas before with expedited review, it requires 2 board members. So expedited review projects still require 2 board members, and standard review requires the entire board, but we'll get more into that a little bit later. Also, something else to note, if you are doing secondary data, before it only required, the IRB only allowed retrospective data, meaning that your data had to exist before submitting to the IRB. Now the regulations have changed to allow prospective data. So if you are collecting data, say from a health center, and you know that they're collecting survey data for the next 5 years, and they have granted you permission to use the aggregate data for 5 years, you can go ahead and collect that, submit an IRB application for existing and secondary data to use that data for the next 5 years. So that's something that saves a lot of investigators time. Also, our consent form notice, it no longer reads like a legal document. The goal now is to have your consent fit on one page, especially if you are doing minimal risk projects. And the purpose for that is to have subjects have a concise, make a concise decision about whether or not they are participating in your project. Most projects no longer have an expiration date. So if the only projects now that will expire are projects that underwent standard review, meaning they were greater than minimal risk. And on your approval letter, you will essentially know if your project underwent standard review because there will be a process of the IRB communicating you, asking you to come to the IRB meeting to explain your project, all of that. So all projects that undergo expedited or administrative or limited review no longer expire. And in place of a continuing review, we're going to ask for an annual check-in, and it's just 5 questions. Hey, is your project still open? Are you still have all your subjects completed all research-related interventions or activities? If we don't hear from you, then we're going to administratively close your project. If you say, hey, yeah, I'm still keeping my project open for whatever, fine, that's all we need to know. We don't need to know any more information from your project.
I have a quick question. Then on the form, we select what we think. Is it a minimum or expedite or standard, anything? We select, or how do we know?
No. So when we get to the forms, I'm going to show you exactly how you'll be able to determine which project you will submit, which form you'll need.
So when you describe secondary data analysis, you indicated that would be analysis with identifiers on it?
Yes.
Identifiers are stripped?
So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean aggregate data. So with the secondary, with the existing and secondary data, only if you have access to identifiers, or if there are links to identifiers such as student ID numbers, email, social security numbers, those types of links to identifiers, then you need to submit. If there are no names, if someone is going to give you a data set that is de-identified, and you do not plan to contact that investigator and say, hey, this particular data set looks really interesting, who is so-and-so, then no, the no IRB is required for that, because research is for identifiable data.
I have one more quick question. All these 3 different kinds of reviews, are you going to go over the timeline for each of them, how they're different in timeline?
I'll get more. So right now I'm doing a general overview, kind of what has changed, but we'll get more into specifics as we go along in the presentation and go over the forms a little bit more and kind of really explain the review process. So on our IRB website, we now have a submission decision tree. So I'm sorry if you can't see this right now, it's a little bit fuzzy, but essentially it's asking, hey, is my project research with human subjects? You only need to submit to the IRB if your project is research with human subjects. And so essentially in this category to the left, it's asking you, are you using identifiable data, or if you are interacting with individuals, whether that's online or face-to-face interaction, and are you collecting data from living individuals, then yes, you need to submit to the IRB. If you are not if you are not using identifiable data, but say, for example, you are collecting survey data, but you're collecting it anonymously, you still need to submit to the IRB because you are still having an interaction with human subjects. It may not be face-to-face, but it is still an interaction. So yes, you do need to submit to the IRB. Then it further triages and say you realize, yes, I do need to submit to the IRB. Then we have the 3 different forms, and we'll go over that into specifics. So they're just below, there are a few categories for submission, but I'll show you another way going forward. So with the 3 different types of review, the administrative and limited review is the IRB application for administrative and limited review, and existing and secondary data. The existing and secondary data gets administrative review, meaning that one IRB member reviews your project. The limited review, your one IRB member also reviews your project. And within that category, it's the surveys, interviews, focus groups with healthy adults, expedited review, minimal risk, interventions, assessments, projects involving children, and standard review, the more invasive projects. So the timeline for research activities, I know this seems like a very elementary slide, but believe it or not, we do have people who submit they've already enrolled all their subjects into their studies prior to submitting to the IRB. So we felt it was necessary to include this information. So what you are allowed to do before IRB approval, you are allowed to develop your project ideas, of course, take your city training, obtain your permission letters, and submit your IRB application. After your project is approved, then you are allowed to officially recruit, meaning you can post your flyers, you can send out social media announcements, you can consent your participants, and you may also conduct your research. If you need to make any changes to your project, this can also be done. This can't be done until after IRB approval, and then you may also publish your research.
I have a colleague who is under the impression that you don't have to go through all of this if you don't plan to publish.
It's a very research is full of gray areas. I wish it was more black and white, but it's not, and this is why I would suggest if you're on the fence about whether or not your project requires IRB review, contact us because, for example, if you're doing a project as a student, and say you're a professor and you've assigned a class project, go interview 5 people and, type up a paper for it. Yes, those are research procedures being a systematic investigation being used, but it's not used for generalizable knowledge. So no, the IRB submission is not required. But if you are a master's student or if you're a professor and you want to collect data and gather broader assumptions about a broader population group, yes, you do need to submit to the IRB. There's also been some conversations about the difference between evaluation and research. If you have specific questions about that, please see me because it really, really depends because one step to the right, you're in research, then reduce one element of your project and you're now in evaluation and doesn't require IRB submission. So I wish there were more clearly. The thing is that the federal regulations is just the floor for what is required for research. And then the regulation leaves so much room open to each institution to set higher standards for their submissions. And so if you were familiar at another institution, they said my project was exempt and I don't have to submit. Well, here at CSULB, we require exempt projects to submit to the IRB. And so that's why we suggest if you really have questions or unsure, contact us first.
In that case, when she's not publishing, that means she's not making a bigger generalization. It may be for herself. For example, a faculty just in the class, we are collecting some data to figure out how to modify our course next semester or something. Mm-hmm. It's not publishable, but it is then it doesn't need it.
No, it does not. But the thing is that what we do require, because what happens a lot is professors will say, oh, I'm just doing this for my own knowledge and I don't think I'm going to get anything. And then they realize, oh, wow, I have some really valuable data. I now all of a sudden want to publish. The IRB cannot retroactively approve research. So that's why we recommend even if it is a quality assurance, quality assessment type project, and you don't think that you want to publish, we still recommend submitting just in case you run into that situation. Otherwise, you'll have to redo your research again to get it approved by the IRB and collect your data again. So now with our forms, the IRB application for administrative and limited review is now our most popular form because most projects on this campus are social behavior research studies that involve surveys, interviews, focus groups, observations. So what we have done with our forms now, we have added a cover sheet to each of our forms, and it's very hard to see, but each of those arrows indicates the most common form of activity for that category. So we'll have, so under this category that submit, also if you are doing classroom, if you're a professor and you're comparing teaching styles, but you want to do it for research, that's under here. If you're doing taste tests with FDA approved substances, again, survey interview, those types of things are on here. And we have examples of some of the most common submissions we get for these forms. So please, before completing the application, please read the cover sheets. We've added cover sheets to almost all of our forms and templates so that there should be no confusion between the decision tree, the cover page, and us as the IRB office. We are really here to help you to ensure that you are submitting the right form. Also, our new form, if some of you are familiar with our old form, our old IRB form was 14 pages. This new form is now, I think, 4 pages long. By the time you submit, most of the time it ends up being about 6 or 7 pages once you submit, and that's because the focus is a lot more tailored, and we're not asking all those invasive questions. We've also added a lot of check boxes to our forms, so you can go to the next form. You can click this one. So, for example, on the IRB application for administrative and limited review, we're going to go through a lot of this form just because it's going to be the form that most of you all will use and submit. So at the top, it's very, very hard to see, but I'll try to read it to you, is the project summary. So even though there's a little bit of space here, the IRB encourages you to use about 250 words to describe the purpose of your project. What you should do is provide us with some context to your projects. What is why are you even interested in this topic? Why is your research going to contribute to the knowledge base of this field? Also, here at the bottom, the subject characteristics. So we have some check boxes like 18 and over, 65 and older. You'll also notice there are no children in this section, meaning that you're like, where's the children box? You shouldn't be using this form if you were doing anything with children at all. So we've tried to add in the check boxes as a checks and balances system. Also, if you check that you are doing 18 and over, females only, but if you mention later on, oh, I'm looking at males and females in your description down here, we're going to say, hey, you only checked off females. You need to go back and check. So it's a check and balance for you as an investigator submitting, but it's also a check and balance for the IRB and the IRB office while reviewing your form. So with the subject description, yes, you checked off 18 and over, females only, but anything else? Say, are you looking at veterans? Are you looking at healthy, competent adults? Or are you looking for the females who identify as transgender women? Or, any other specific, or you're only looking for female corporate bosses, something like that. So this is where you'll get a little bit more specific and tell the IRB what specific population you are studying. If you're just looking at a broad general public, then 18 and over, healthy, competent individuals, nothing else specific, but please let us know that in this section on the form. So there's subject recruitment. Again, we also have check boxes to say, are you posting flyers, doing social media recruitment, email, face-to-face, snowball sampling, but also we want to know the step-by-step. So if you've checked off 2 options, if you've checked off flyers and emails, in this description box here where the arrow is, you should describe for each method that you've checked off how you are going to use that recruitment. So if you've checked off emails and face-to-face sampling, for example, you need to explain, okay, I'm going to send an email to the president of this organization and have them distribute this email template referenced in Appendix B to send to their list of contacts. Participants are going to contact me, the investigator, blah, blah, blah. For face-to-face recruitment, I am going to have a table out on, in front of the library. I have permission to do that. I'm going to, approach individuals, read the script to say what I'm doing. Our IRB is very conservative, and they want to know what it is that you're doing. Also, view the IRB, write your application as if we have no idea what you are doing, because 9 times out of 10, Our board members don't. And especially now with the new review categories, especially with the administrative and limited review, only one board member will review your project, and it's no guarantee that someone on our board has experience in that discipline to review your project. They do have the option to request another board member to give an opinion on your project, and so that may prolong the review process. But that's why we really encourage you to give as much information as possible so that the board can make a decision on whether or not your procedures are coercive, or whether or not you need to implore another method, or whether offer you suggestions on how to improve your research. So with your research methodology, what are you doing with your project? That is the most important question on this form. It's at the end of section 2. So it asks for describe the step-by-step procedures of your project, beginning with the informed consent process, and make sure that you describe anything else that occurs after IRB approval. So begin your steps with the consent process. How are you consenting subjects? If you have an online survey, for example, you need to explain that when subjects click the link, the first page they're going to see is the consent form. It's going to be a line at the end of the consent form that notes that by clicking the I agree or the next button, they have read and understood what is going on with my project. If you're doing face-to-face consenting, you need to describe whether or not the participant's going to get a copy of the consent form. Are you going to read over it with them? Describe the methods. The IRB needs to know what you're doing. Also, with your methods, if you're using a mixed methods approach and you're doing both, say, surveys and focus groups, the IRB needs to know the procedures for that. If you're following up with your participants again afterwards, don't say, oh, I'm going to follow up with them to have them read my chapter 4. How are you going to do that? Did participants consent to being contacted again after follow-up? So these are the things that you need to think about and explain to the IRB when following your procedure. Also, something that we didn't show above this, it has the different methods of assessment, what you intend to do. It has different assessments that you can check off. So again, if you've only checked off online surveys and then you mention in your description of procedures that you have a paper-based survey, we're going to come back and say, did you mean to check online, or are you doing both online and paper-based surveys? So again, those checks and balances. The second most important question, there is a risk and mitigation section. The IRB, even though your project is minimal risk or less than minimal risk, it is unacceptable to say that there are no risks. What is the point? You have risk walking out of your door every single day. Although it may be very, very minor, the IRB, there is still some risk associated. If you're a professor conducting even online anonymous surveys with your students, there's still some risk of coercion involved. Almost all projects have a potential risk for loss of confidentiality. So really think about those, and also think about your procedures and what you're doing that may involve risk. And so each risk needs to correspond with a mitigation. So if you list 3 risks, there should be 3 mitigations to follow through with that. So with your data access and storage, this is another area the IRB is very concerned about for the limited review in particular. We need to know where you are storing your data. You as investigators need to maintain your records for 3 years, just in case, again, if we get audited and someone says, hey, where's project this and such and such and such and such, or there's an issue, we need to be able to contact you and figure out what's going on, or just in case, or if you had an incident where someone steals your laptop and now you have a subject master list with everybody's names and you're collecting information, we need to know that your information was stored in a secure manner to kind of reduce the risk of someone being able to steal identifiable data from your participants. So I'm not going to go in depth with the IRB application for expedited and standard review, but again, the arrows here kind of describe what it is this project involves. So if you're doing research with any vulnerable populations, meaning you're doing research on anyone with cognitive impairments, pregnant women, prisoners, children. Even on this campus, we're still fleshing out some more vulnerable populations to include in here. But some institutions have gone as far. I know Cal State LA, they have deemed undocumented residents as a vulnerable population. And I know our campus and Cal State LA have the highest amount of students with undocumented residents. Yes.
Homeless individuals experiencing homelessness.
So our IRB is currently working on a more clearly defined risk, and this right now it's on a one-to-one basis. So that's why again suggest contact the IRB until we can put more information. So I should have prefaced this presentation with our IRB is currently under a transition. Dr. Jason Wang has been here for a year. I've been here a little less than a year. And so there are a lot of procedures that we inherited, and we are doing our best to revise. And we know a lot of things are outdated here. And we know that investigators and faculty have said, hey, we need more guidance for our submissions. Every time I do a project, there's something else that comes up that wasn't there before. So we are doing our best to try to educate you all and try to revise our procedures and make the process a little bit more efficient. But also with that, it's going to take time because with the campus initiative to increase research on this campus, we've seen a lot more submissions. Last semester, we had 200 new projects in addition to continuing reviews, requests for amendments, other inquiries. So please be patient with us. We are a small office. We are a smaller board. So please give us time, and we'll get into that with the timeline. So again, this is when you need to submit the IRB application for expedited and standard review. One thing I forgot to note with this form, something that's very temporary, if your project has federal funding, from now until July, regardless of the risk level of your project, you will need to submit the IRB application for expedited and standard review. And that's because the federal regulations has kind of pushed a pause button on moving forward with the new regulation until they produce some more guidance. And so they have mandated all projects with federal funding abide by the pre-2018 rules. All other projects, we have decided to move forward since we've already revised our forms, policies, templates, and everything else. So if your project has federal funding, whether you remember, if I see that you've checked that your project has funding and it's a federal agency, NIH or anything like that, I'm going to flag it and say, hey, you need to submit the IRB application for expedited and standard review. But the good news is after July 19, 2018, if the Trump administration finally gives the go-ahead and approves it, then after that, once your project comes up for a year review, it won't have an expiration date, and it will be reviewed under a lower category going forward. So that's the good news. So all of our projects still require submission on IRB.net. The jury is still out on IRB.net. I don't even know if it's still out anymore. It's mixed reviews, but this is the process that we have now going forward. So once you submit your documents to IRB.net, pretty much the majority of the communication for your project will get sent through IRB.net. We strongly discourage emailing us, hey, these are all of my documents for my project. Can you look it over and make sure everything is good? Because we're going to do that with the pre-review, which I'll get into shortly. But all submissions go through IRB.net.
Here we go.
Okay. So in addition to your IRB application, your project may require other attachments, as we call them appendices. If you are a student, we require a faculty advisor letter to be submitted with your project. That should be filled out by your advisor. If you are interacting with participants, if you're doing anything other than accessing secondary data, you need a consent form. Any recruitment material, any flyers, social media announcements, email script, face-to-face scripts, the IRB needs to see that in a Word document. Any permission letters, they need to have live signatures and on letterhead. And your survey interview protocols, we need to see those in a Word document. So if you'll notice with our consent forms, this is what it looks like now. The first 2 pages are just instructional material to say, okay, if you're doing research with children, this is the language you need to use. If you are doing different types of projects, if you're audio recording or video recording, we show you how we have checkboxes and some standard language that you should have there. So we really tried to make an effort to have your consent. We're really making an effort to have your submissions the first time be as clean as possible. And then our new consent template, this is By the time you fill this out, it should still be on one page. And so essentially fill in the highlighted sections, remove the highlighting. We've had some issues in the past where people submit the consent form with the directions still on there. So when you submit it to the IRB, remove those first 2 pages and make sure the highlighting is removed, because those are we're just trying to hone your eye into what you need to fill out. And so this is a sample of a completed mixed methods consent form. So it is possible to have all of your information in a concise manner. So with your permission letters, this is a sample of a permission letter. It should be printed on letterhead when applicable, have the PI's name, your project title, and the letter should explain the scope of what you are granted permission for, whether they're going to send out recruitment emails on your behalf, whether or not they're going to grant you space to actually conduct your research there, whether or not you can, recruit face-to-face in their lobby, whatever it may be, it should be explained in this letter. And we look at this letter, if you note something in your recruitment section or your procedure section, and we look at your letter and we're saying, hey, you're saying that you're going to send out emails. There's nothing in this letter that notes sending out emails. So when you're drafting your letters, what we encourage is for you to write the letters for the individuals and have them send it to whomever needs to grant permission for you, and have them kind of read over it. If they agree to it, have them print it out on their letterhead and sign it. That's usually the easiest way to go about it.
If the institution is this university and the targets are students even,
Mm-hmm.
you have to get permission from the university?
So there are a few levels of permission on campus recruiting. So if you are, we'll show it on our website at the end, but say if you want to post out on the common areas, Student Life and Development needs to approve any tabling or posting in general and common areas. So you would need to send an email to Student Life and Development to receive permission. They have those. If you are doing face-to-face recruitment in classes, say doing in-class announcements, outside of your class, yes, we need to see permissions from either the department or the individual professors allowing you to come into their courses to recruit. If you're posting flyers in your department should grant you permission to do that as well. So, yes.
Like your own students?
Your own students, no, you don't. The IRB is working on some guidance for investigators using their own students in their research, just because we want to help you all reduce coercion. So no, you should note in your IRB application for your recruitment, though, that you are recruiting your own students, and you should kind of use a method that will reduce coercion, such as sending an email out through Beachboard or collecting the information anonymously, or have someone else come in. If you have a grad student assistant, have them come in, introduce the project, collect the consent, have 2 boxes, one for consent forms, one for surveys, have everyone turn them in, pass them out to everyone, have everyone turn them in, completed or not. Those types of procedures to kind of reduce coercion amongst your own students.
And we have to make it clear in the
way
the procedure.
You should, because if you're saying, I'm gonna conduct research with my own class and I'm gonna pass out surveys, that doesn't tell the IRB, because you could, as a professor, you can say, okay, I'm gonna give extra credit, or I'm going to make this a mandatory part of my course assignment, but the IRB wants to know, okay, since research is technically a voluntary act, you need to explain an alternative for students who choose not to participate, or you need to explain how they will not be coerced by you as an investigator, feel pressured that, my grade is going to be impacted if I don't participate in this research, that kind of thing. So that's what the IRB is looking for if you're using your own students. We don't discourage it, but we just want to make sure that the manner you go about it is course.
The psychology subject pool use, does that have a permission letter requirement?
Dr. Amercon?
I don't believe so. I think that what you're going to have to do, though, is get IRB approval before you can use the separate tool. So they will look at your protocol, the IRB, and then you submit that to. So I'll just say no.
Okay, thank you.
And running the faculty advisor letter. So if you are a faculty member who is requiring students to submit research, they will more than likely present you with a blank template. We've revised it now to include check boxes, and there are some small fill-in forms for you as a faculty advisor to say how you are going to supervise the student's research. And the reason we do this is because we see a lot of submissions from students that are incomplete or very all over the place, and we can tell their faculty advisor was not involved in the research. We are one of the few CSU systems that actually allow students to submit research. Most other institutions require the faculty advisor to be the principal investigator. So this is the IRB's way of making sure that their research is properly supervised.
The same thing for thesis students, it's a
Any student, and whether it's an undergrad or grad student, we require the faculty advisor letter to be submitted with their project.
that we do all the time. But I'm saying that it's not that students have to do with faculty all the time. They can do on their own.
The letter?
No, I'm saying that any research, as you said, like we are the only campus or maybe few campuses which allow students to do that.
In the CSU system, yes. The CSU IRB administrators got together recently, and we just did a survey. How many campuses allow students to be the principal investigator on a study? Most of them said we don't allow that.
Except the thesis.
No, even then, their faculty advisor has to be the investigator on their project, and the student is the co-investigator. And the reason they do that is because a lot of institutions have had so many problems with students conducting research. They'll have a faculty advisor on their project, but because the faculty is managing 20 other students, that things happen, and in order for them to reduce incidents or try to prevent them, other CSUs have decided not to. So we are one of the few that actually allows students, even undergraduates, to be principal investigators, hence why we have the faculty advisor letter. And so don't be afraid, don't be concerned, because the IRB sometimes does contact the faculty advisor if we see a project with really alarming submissions, something that they're doing things that are either illegal or really strongly not advised. We will contact you and say, hey, you turned in this letter, but you say you're supervising a student, but this project there, the activities are way over the place. Can we please come to a meeting? So now we're going to the review process. So once you get all your materials, submit them to IRB.net. All projects undergo an administrative pre-review. So what that means is every project that comes in, IRB staff is going to look at it to ensure completeness, to make sure that you are not doing things that are beyond the scope of federal or local institutional regulation, and just to even offer suggestions for your project. If you're using a recruitment method that's a little bit sketchy, we may offer suggestions to say, hey, this is a little bit too much, why don't you scale it back, or you're all over the place with your methods, or you're trying to do too many methods at one time, and you say your project is going to be open for 3 months, why don't you scale it back? So that's what the pre-review is for. Those comments are not, you don't have to make those suggestions, because they're only suggestions, but we highly advise, as most projects that adhere to the pre-review comments and suggestions typically have very minimal or no comments back from the board members. The pre-review process right now, I would say, is taking about a week to review, because at this time of the semester, we're getting on average about 50 to 70 projects a month. So with the small office staff, please bear with us. We'd like to say that if you haven't heard anything for 2 weeks, then contact us, because there may be a time where it may take me 6 business days to go through your submissions. So don't hit me up on the 6th business day. Hey, Tiffany, where's my project? That's okay, but I try to give us 2 weeks just in case. So after we receive any changes you decide to make back, or if you say, hey, Tiffany, I know I submitted my project to you a few days ago, but I also got another permission letter, or, I've actually decided to remove this procedure from my project. Can you unlock my project and so I can make those changes? You're allowed to do that in between that time, because the IRB has not reviewed your project yet. So after your project is good to go, we assign it to the board members according to the review category. So with the expedited review, for example, since it requires 2 board members, if it's a kinesiology project, for example, I will try to wait to at least one of our board members who is in the kinesiology department and another board member is available to review your project. So that may scale out your review a little bit, or if you have a very complicated procedure or requires a board member's expertise, if they're not available at that moment, it may take a couple extra days for us to assign it to that board member. So our board members have 1 week to review your project once it's in their hands. After that, it will take at least another business day or two for the IRB office to compile their comments into a modification letter if they have any modifications. Even if they approve your project outright, it still may take a couple of business days after that week period of time for the IRB to get back to your project. Because remember, it's not just your project in the queue. There are other projects getting reviewed at the same time and other inquiries and all of that going on. Again, during that time, IRB Net is not the most sophisticated system. So even when your project is undergoing review, it's still going to say pending review. So some people get panicked and say, hey, it's still saying it's pending, but it's under review. And that's something that we have no control over. So try to be patient with us. So again, that 2 weeks, if you haven't heard anything within that 2 weeks, you should have either received preview comments back or received comments back from the board or something within that 2 weeks. If the board has any comments, they will, you will issue a modification letter via IRB Net. Those changes are required, and that's because the board has identified some significant errors with your project that need to be addressed prior in order to secure approval. Once those changes are submitted, the IRB office will confirm that all changes are met. And the easiest way we do this is we ask you all to highlight or change the color font of the changes that you have made, just so it's easier for us to identify them, thus speeding up the process. If we say, hey, everything is good to go, we'll issue an approval. If the amount of modifications was very significant or some of our board members had a lot of concerns, sometimes they will ask to see your project back again to confirm that you have addressed all of their changes. So that, again, may prolong the process for review, hence why the IRB really encourages you to flush out your ideas and listen to the pre-reviews going forward so that you can avoid a further delay of your projects. And then once you receive your approval letter, you're free to conduct your research according to your approved protocol. So with your approval letter, IRBNet will issue 2 emails. The first will be, hey, your project's approved. The second will be a link to your approval letter. Please read your approval letter because it has some very important information on it. One of the things you'll notice is that if your project did undergo standard review, there's no expiration date. Don't be alarmed. The second thing is there are 5 items down here. Number 1 instructs you to include a header on your consent forms that said approved on this date, the date of your approval by the CSULB IRB, and the reasoning for that is to help subjects know that an ethics committee did review your project and that it is good to go. And there's some other information on there as well, so please read your approval letters. If you need to make any changes to your project after it's approved, such as adding new personnel, changing study procedures, including new advertisements, or you've secured another permission, we have a 1-page form, a request for amendments to an approved protocol, so you'll need to submit that form in addition to any other documents that are affected by the changes. So if you're changing your procedures, you need to update your IRB application, your most recent IRB application to now include that procedure, in addition to the questions that you are adding or any other assessments that you're adding. And the reason for this is that the IRB needs to keep a record of your project changing over time. So it's not okay to just submit, oh, these are the new questions. We need to now see in your application when you're going to do this, and also your consent form. If you're adding assessments to this project, also you'll need to change your consent form. So those are things to think about. So final takeaways. If you didn't remember anything else I said, I know it's a lot of information. Make sure you complete your city training before submitting to the IRB. Make sure most projects will be submitted on the IRB application for administrative and limited review. The review process takes time, so We don't like to give specific timelines on things because depending on the time of the year, we may be inundated with submissions, and there may be times where your project can go straight through. So please take that into consideration. Also, contact the IRB office. We are a resource here for you. Do not hesitate to call us, email us. We will do our best to help you. Don't see us as the police. We're also here we're like your mother. Your mother is there to, protect you and make sure that you're doing everything right, but also to scold you when you're doing something wrong. And finally, our IRB website, when you click on it, the easiest way to find our website is to go to the CSULB main page, type in IRB, we're the first link. But when you click onto our webpage, the first thing you'll see is announcements. We'll try to keep this updated. So right now it's noting that the IRB is no longer accepting outdated forms. If you're using any forms predated 2018, we will email you back and say, this is a really great submission, but you need to submit them on our new forms. And then we also, as you scroll through, we have a lot of the resources that I showed you through in the slide on the website. Any questions before we briefly show you the website if we have any time?
That city training,
Yes.
how do you get that number?
So as soon as you create an account with Citi, it will automatically generate it's like a 6-digit number that will show up next to your name on your Citi profile. So when we ask for your Citi ID number, there's a course number associated. We don't want that. We want the number that's directly in parentheses next to your name.
So they give you a number.
Yes.
We call it city ID number. That's your unique ID. So we can as long as we have your ID number, we can track all the courses you have taken. Not only some PI, even some other, And the students need to complete the RCR, the online training. So that's why.
That's the other thing. On our website, we do have a little table that shows who needs to complete Citi training and who doesn't, meaning anyone who is engaged in the research activities, meaning they are consenting subjects, they are helping collect data, they have access to identifiable data, they need to complete this Citi training as well too, whether they are students or another faculty on your project.
That's related. Just emphasize a little bit. From your project, your grant, your project, you think about, okay, I have lots of people in my project, right? You got grant. But who should be on your IRB protocol? Only those really engage your research, meaning either engaged in the informed consent, data collection area, right, the steps, or interact with the human subject. And also, I will respond to you. Then, in the later data analysis, as long as that person can have the access to the personal identifiable information. Say later on you got a student say, I already group up all this data. They aggregated, no personal identifiable information. Even later on, maybe you want, have a collaborator or even consultant for help you to do data analysis, statistical analysis. As long as that data is not identifiable, you do not need them in your protocol. Okay, so your question.
So I'm going to be working on my thesis with another student. Right. Do we each need to fill out our own IRB?
No.
One
just
protocol.
one for both of us.
If I understand correctly, your student should be the PI, and you should have your faculty advisor letter.
Okay.
And then both you, officially, ideally, that's my kind of personal suggestion. The faculty advisor should complete Citi online training to make sure that person is even qualified to give the advice, right?
And then I was also speaking with my advisor, and we're doing a documentary.
Right.
And he said that was a little fuzzy as far as IRB approval. Is it the same?
Come talk to us after.
Okay.
So right now, we do have in the back we do have a sign-in sheet. So if you are hesitant or don't know if you need to submit IRB approval, or if you have specific questions and you want to talk with us more in depth, or if you are frustrated by something in the IRB process and you want to change, we also have an envelope for you to submit your comments or feedbacks or suggestions for the IRB. But we're going to just briefly, before we end in a couple minutes, just wanted to highlight a couple things on our website. So scrolling down, so here in the box, here's our contact information. You can email us or contact us via phone. That's the easiest way to get help. We also have the jump to sections to jump right into the initial submissions, FAQs, and all that. So this is the announcement for this event that you're at right now.
And this is where our office located. Now you know that. For the other people, it will be still a maze telling you.
So again, the decision tree is online as well, and at the bottom of the decision tree are the links to the forms themselves, and once you've decided on which form you need to fill out. Again, there's the table I was talking about with city training, who needs to fill it out. If you're accessing any of this information, you need to fill it out. Permission letters, we have the templates embedded in the details for everything, and we have descriptions. Back to the campus recruitment, your question about getting permissions from different places on campus. We have the student life and development contact. If you're need access to student level data on campus through the Institutional Research and Assessment Office, they are a very good resource if you need large amounts of student data, or you want to say, hey, I just want to send emails to 500 random students. They can generate that information from you. Their contact, their information is there. It's a data request form, and then just information again for getting permissions from anyone else on campus. A faculty advisor letter. We have the template and a sample there if you want to see it. Online surveys and notices, so the consent template is down there as well. Just noting about IRBNet, we have instructions for setting up your IRBNet account and then actually submitting your materials to IRBNet, so we suggest looking at those first before contacting us. Also, again, the categories of review that we went over today and explained. We have the IRB review process. It was those same 5 steps of submission to approval. Any other submissions that you may need if you need to submit an amendment, annual check-in forms, all of that is here. If your project does require continuing review, we revise that form as well. And then any FAQs that we may have, that some of our most common questions. And then lastly, we have some of our IRB policies, and those will continue to be updated as our board votes on policies that we want you all to know about. So that's all I have for you all today. Please see either one of us if you have questions at the end. And thank you for your time.
The only thing, thank you. Again, we try to, take the advantage of this. According to the regulation, now back to my role. Okay. My role is try to facilitate the research compliance and minimize and avoid research misconduct. So we provide campus-wide education in terms of responsible conduct of research, RCR, according to the federal regulation, especially from NIH and NSF. The students, especially undergraduate student, graduate student, the PhD student, postdoc, are mandatory to complete the RCR training, especially if they are involved in a project funded by federal regulation. So in terms of RCR training, our common module is that the students need to complete the city online module for RCR. It's not for IRB. Okay, that's why if you have an ID, you will set up your affiliation with the CSULB, number 1, because the city online can allow you to set up different affiliations. For example, I had my previous institution. I can still have that record. And if you just complete the city online within 3 years, we still accept as a credit. You don't have to redo this within 3 years. But sorry, if 3 years expired, and then we have to ask you redo this.
So where we can check if it's within 3 years or beyond?
You can log into the city, and you can check your status. Go ahead. Yeah, later on. Stay with us. We'll show you.
We forgot to put our
Your username, password doesn't matter. Yeah,
7 years of
technical chatting is not a big deal at all. Yeah, we will always handle that.
Do you double check the city training of the faculty supervisors?
Yes, we have to. Yeah, we have to check. Later on, some of you will get it's not shocking reminder, okay? It's a friendly reminder. Sorry, we check this, ideally, that's the model we're going to do is that 90 days prior to the expiration days, we should send you a reminder. We understand you're busy. And then 6 days, 30 days, and then on this date, if you don't finish that, sorry, you're not qualified, right? So that's the model I'm proposing.